The room goes quiet, not the kind of silence you can laugh off, not the kind that passes in a few seconds. This silence sits there, thick, uncomfortable, pressing against everyone's chest. You can almost hear it. The camera doesn't cut away. It lingers slowly, intentionally, as if even the lens knows something has just gone wrong. Rasheeda's smile doesn't disappear all at once, it fades in stages. First the corners of her mouth tighten, then her jaw locks. Her eyes, once relaxed, harden, fixed straight ahead, unblinking. This isn't shock. This is control. The kind of control you learn after years of swallowing things you never wanted to accept. Across from her, Kirk shifts in his seat. Not dramatically, just enough. His hands come together, then separate, then come together again. Fingers rubbing against each other like he's trying to steady himself. His shoulders stiffen, his breathing changes. It's subtle, but the camera catches it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Then it happens. One word, one name, Jasmine. No yelling, no accusation, no build-up. Just a name dropped casually into the conversation, almost gently. As if it's nothing. As if it hasn't carried years of damage behind it. As if it hasn't shattered trust, embarrassed a marriage, and lived rent-free in the back of everyone's mind. But the reaction, instant. Rasheeda's entire body language shifts. The air in the room feels heavier, like someone just closed all the windows at once. Kirk freezes, not metaphorically, physically. His eyes flick toward Rasheeda, then away from the camera, then back again. He swallows. Hard. His mouth opens slightly like he wants to speak, but nothing comes out. This wasn't supposed to happen. That name wasn't supposed to come up. That door wasn't supposed to open. This moment wasn't rehearsed, wasn't planned, wasn't cleared. And whatever they thought was buried, whatever they thought time had erased, just clawed its way back to the surface. You can feel it through the screen. Viewers at home felt it too. Social media exploded almost immediately. Clips were shared before the scene even finished airing. Fans paused the footage, rewound it, slowed it down frame by frame. They studied Rasheeda's face. Kirk's hands, the silence between words, because this wasn't just reality TV drama. This was panic. This was years of tension compressed into a single second. This was rage held back so long it no longer needed words. This was the moment everyone realized something terrifyingly simple. This story was never really over. What followed didn't just shake the room. It reopened wounds that never healed. It triggered backlash that had been waiting quietly. And it exposed just how fragile this so-called peace really was. By the time the cameras finally cut away, one thing was clear. Nothing, absolutely nothing, looked the same anymore. And the truth, this was only the beginning. The thing about stories like this is that they don't start where the cameras start rolling. They begin years earlier, quietly, privately, long before anyone is ready to admit what's broken. Before the name became a trigger, there was an image. Rasheeda was always presented as the steady one, grounded, loyal, the woman who held everything together when cracks started showing. She wasn't loud, she didn't need to be. Her strength lived in restraint, in choosing composure when chaos would have been easier. Fans saw her as untouchable, not because she never got hurt, but because she rarely let the hurt show. Kirk's role was different. He was the fixer, the talker. The one who believed that enough explanations could smooth over anything. Public apologies, carefully chosen words, promises of growth. From the outside, it looked like control. But control, when you look closer, often masks fear, fear of losing the narrative, fear of being fully exposed. And then there was Jasmine. At first, just a whisper. A rumor floating around quietly, carried by side glances and unanswered questions. Nothing confirmed, nothing solid, just enough to make people uneasy. The kind of rumor you hope fades if you ignore it long enough. But it didn't fade. When her name finally became public, it wasn't just a reveal, it was an implosion. Conversations turned into confrontations. Denials turned into explanations. Explanations turned into contradictions. And every time someone tried to clear it up, things only got messier. For Rasheeda, the damage wasn't just emotional. It was public, very public. Cameras captured moments no one should have to relive: disbelief, humiliation, the slow realization that trust doesn't break loudly. It cracks quietly, piece by piece, until one day you look at what's left and don't recognize it anymore. Still, she stayed. That decision followed her everywhere. Some praised her strength, others questioned it. But what most people missed was this: staying doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiving doesn't mean erasing. And moving forward doesn't mean the past stops breathing. Behind the scenes, things were never as simple as they appeared on screen. Conversations were avoided. Certain topics became off-limits. Certain names were never spoken out loud, not because they didn't matter, but because they mattered too much. Time passed, seasons changed. Interviews focused on growth and healing, on learning lessons, on moving forward. The narrative shifted, at least publicly. Calm replaced chaos, silence replaced confrontation, but silence has a cost. And every unspoken thing collects interest. So when that name was spoken again, casually, unexpectedly, it wasn't just a callback to old drama, it was a reminder of everything that was pushed down instead of worked through. Everything that was smoothed over instead of resolved. That's why the reaction was so immediate, that's why the tension felt so real, that's why one word was enough to make everything unravel, because this wasn't about the past. It was about everything the past left behind. And now that it had been dragged back into the light, there was no pretending it didn't exist. Not anymore. The moment passes on screen in seconds, but behind it the timeline stretches back years, layered with choices, pressure, and moments people were never meant to see. Long before that silence hit the room, there had already been warning signs, small ones at first. A hesitation before answering certain questions. A quick glance between Rasheeda and Kirk when conversations drifted too close to forbidden territory. Producers noticed it, cast members noticed it, viewers felt it even if they couldn't explain why. Whenever the past came close to the surface, Kirk would step in first, redirect the conversation, crack a joke, shift the focus somewhere safer. Rasheeda, meanwhile, perfected the art of stillness. She didn't engage, she didn't react, she simply withdrew, emotionally present but guarded, like someone standing behind glass. Episodes aired. Interviews rolled out, headlines softened. The narrative became one of resilience, of a couple who had made it through, of lessons learned and mistakes left behind. On paper it looked clean, but time doesn't erase patterns, it exposes them. Behind the scenes, the tension never fully left. Certain conversations were postponed indefinitely. Certain feelings were labeled, handled without ever being unpacked. And the longer that went on, the heavier it became. Not loud enough to explode, but heavy enough to shift the atmosphere in any room they walked into. Then came the setting that changed everything. It was supposed to be easy, a controlled environment. Cameras rolling, yes, but within boundaries everyone understood. The kind of space where topics are prepped, questions reviewed, moments anticipated, nothing spontaneous, nothing dangerous, until one question slipped through, not aggressive. Not loaded, just specific enough, a reference to the past, a name attached to unfinished business, and suddenly the careful structure collapsed. You can see it in the footage if you watch closely, the split second where Kirk realizes what's happening. The way his posture changes before anyone else reacts. He leans forward slightly as if proximity might soften the impact. His mouth opens, closes. He tries to jump in, but the timing is off. Rasheeda beats him to it. Not with words, with energy. Her silence lands harder than any outburst could have. It draws a line without announcing it. A boundary that doesn't need explanation. Her eyes don't search for approval. They don't check for cameras. They stay steady, locked. Kirk panics, and this time the mask slips. He talks too fast, explains too much, tries to smooth something that can't be smoothed. The more he speaks, the more uncomfortable it gets. Not because of what he's saying, but because of what he's trying to avoid. The room feels it, the crew feels it, and the audience watching from home feels it too. That's when the reaction begins to spread. Within minutes, clips hit social media. Short, raw, unedited. Fans start breaking it down second by second. Screenshots, zoom-ins, side-by-side comparisons with old footage. People remember things they hadn't thought about in years. Comments pour in. Why did he react like that? Why did she shut it down so fast? Why does this still hurt if it's really over? The timeline tightens. Past interviews resurface. Old statements are replayed with new context. What once sounded reassuring now feels evasive. What once felt resolved now feels paused. And suddenly, that single moment on camera doesn't stand alone anymore. It connects. It connects to everything that was never said. Everything that was delayed, everything that was pushed aside for the sake of appearances. This wasn't a random reaction, it was a build-up. And the more people looked back, the clearer it became, this explosion didn't come out of nowhere. It was always heading here. The tension doesn't disappear after the cameras stop rolling. It follows them, offset, into hallways, into group chats, into conversations that suddenly go quiet when certain names come up. Because once something cracks in public, it rarely stays contained. Behind the scenes, people start talking, not loudly, not on record, but enough. Crew members exchange looks. Cast members revisit old conversations they once brushed off. Little details that didn't matter before now feel important. A pause here, a contradiction there, a memory that suddenly fits into place. What makes this situation different isn't just the history, it's the avoidance. Rasheeda doesn't explain what she felt in that moment. She doesn't justify it. She doesn't soften it for anyone's comfort. That silence becomes its own statement. And the more she refuses to elaborate, the louder the speculation grows. Kirk, meanwhile, does the opposite. He talks, he explains, he reassures. He repeats phrases fans have heard before: growth, lessons learned, moving forward, but this time the delivery feels different, tighter, less confident. Like someone walking carefully through a room filled with glass. Viewers pick up on it immediately. Online, the conversation shifts from what happened to why it still matters. Old clips begin circulating again, moments that once felt resolved now replayed with a more critical eye. People notice inconsistencies, small ones, but enough to raise questions. Why does this subject still trigger such visible discomfort? Why does he rush to control the moment every time it comes up? Why does she shut it down instead of shutting it out? Then come the reactions from the edges, side comments, vague posts, captions that don't mention names but don't need to, likes that appear, disappear, then reappear somewhere else. Silence from people who usually speak fast and loud. That silence is intentional. And intentional silence almost always protects something. Speculation grows not because of new information, but because of old information being re-examined. Fans don't accuse, they connect, they line things up, they notice patterns. They notice how certain questions are always deflected, how certain topics are framed as the past without ever being addressed, how certain emotions resurface the moment control slips. What once looked like maturity now looks like suppression. And suppression has a way of fighting back, because the truth isn't always hidden in what people say. Sometimes it's hidden in what they refuse to sit with. This moment didn't expose a secret, it exposed a fracture between moving on and moving past, between forgiveness and healing, between image and reality. And once that fracture is visible, it can't be unseen. By now, the audience isn't asking if something is unresolved. They're asking how deep it goes. And that's when the story takes its sharpest turn, because the focus shifts from what happened back then to what's been happening this whole time. The shift doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, in fragments, the kind of shift you only recognize once it's already too late to stop. Hours after the clip goes viral, something changes in the conversation online. The tone sharpens. Fans stop reacting emotionally and start reacting analytically. They're no longer just watching the moment, they're studying it. Old footage resurfaces. Not the obvious clips everyone's seen before, but the in-between moments. The pauses, the deflections, the scenes where answers felt rehearsed and emotions felt managed. People line them up next to the present-day reaction, and suddenly the contrast is impossible to ignore. That's the twist, because what fans realize isn't that something new was revealed, it's that something never stopped being true. The calm wasn't peace, the silence wasn't healing, it was containment, and that containment just failed. In interviews following the incident, the language shifts. Slightly, subtly, words like past and behind us are still used, but they sound thinner now, less convincing. Kirk chooses his words carefully, almost cautiously, like someone aware that every sentence might be replayed later. His tone is measured, but his eyes give him away. There's tension there, pressure. Rasheeda, meanwhile, says less than ever. And that becomes the loudest part of the story. She doesn't clarify, she doesn't correct narratives. She doesn't jump in to defend or deny, she lets the moment stand exactly as it happened, unedited, unexplained. And in doing so, she forces the audience to sit with the discomfort instead of resolving it for them. That decision splits opinion. Some viewers praise her restraint, calling it strength. Others read it as exhaustion, the kind that comes from answering the same questions for years without ever getting real answers back. But almost everyone agrees on one thing: this wasn't performative. This wasn't staged drama. This was raw. The twist becomes clearer when people stop focusing on Jasmine as a person and start focusing on what her name represents. Not an individual, but a fracture point. A symbol of trust broken in public and repaired in private without the proper tools. And once that realization hits, the narrative collapses inward. This wasn't about reopening old wounds. It was about revealing that the wounds never closed. That's why the reaction felt disproportionate. That's why the panic was visible. That's why the silence carried so much weight. Because this moment didn't threaten the past. It threatened the story they'd been telling about the present. And when a story you've worked hard to maintain suddenly shows cracks, the fear isn't about what people already know. It's about what they might start questioning next. By now, the audience understands something crucial. This wasn't a slip-up, it was a stress test, and the image didn't hold. The fallout doesn't arrive with noise, it arrives with distance. In the days that follow, the energy around them changes. Public appearances feel more controlled, conversations feel shorter, smiles don't linger the way they used to. There's a carefulness now, not just in what's said, but in what's avoided. Rasheeda becomes more selective. When she speaks, it's about business, about focus, about moving forward. She doesn't revisit the moment. She doesn't reference the clip. And that restraint, intentional or not, shifts how people see her. Support pours in from fans who recognize the signs of someone protecting their peace, not because they've healed, but because they're tired of reopening scars. Kirk faces a different reaction. The scrutiny follows him, every interview. Every appearance, every answer is weighed against that moment. Viewers replay the panic in his body language, the rushed explanations, the discomfort, the need to regain control. Questions resurface that were once dismissed. Doubts that were once quiet now feel justified. Nothing explicit is said. No accusations are made, but the damage doesn't need accusations, it lives in perception. Commentary channels dissect the moment endlessly. Not to sensationalize it, but to understand it. Fans debate whether this incident marks growth or stagnation, whether it proves resilience or avoidance, whether staying silent is strength or surrender. And through it all, Jasmine's presence lingers, not in action but in absence. Her name isn't spoken again, but it doesn't need to be. It's already done its work, it's already exposed the fault line. What becomes clear is this. The dynamic has changed. The old narrative of resolution no longer feels stable. The audience doesn't fully buy it anymore. Not because they want chaos, but because authenticity demands honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Careers don't collapse. Reputations don't explode overnight. Instead, something more subtle happens. Trust shifts. The audience watches more closely, listens more carefully, believes less easily. And that shift matters because once an audience starts questioning, the story stops belonging solely to the people living it. It becomes communal. This single moment, brief, silent, uncomfortable, becomes a reference point. A before and after, not because it revealed new facts, but because it revealed truth in reaction. And reaction doesn't lie. By now, it's clear this wasn't just a viral clip, it was a turning point. And now it sits with you, not as a clip. Not as a headline, but as a feeling you can't quite shake. Because moments like this don't ask to be judged, they ask to be felt. They linger in your mind long after the screen goes dark, long after the comments stop scrolling, long after the noise fades. And the reason is simple, you recognize something real in it. You've seen that look before, the tightened jaw, the controlled silence. The way someone protects themselves not by exploding, but by shutting the door completely. That wasn't drama for the sake of television. That was a boundary being drawn in real time. So the question becomes, what do you do when the past refuses to stay where you left it? Was Rasheeda wrong for snapping the moment that name was spoken? Or was she finally choosing herself after years of carrying something that never truly healed? Was that silence a sign of strength, or the last line of defense before something deeper breaks through? And what about Kirk? Did you see panic, or did you see fear? Fear of losing control of a narrative he worked hard to rebuild. Fear of being pulled back into a moment he thought he'd already paid for. Or fear that one unfiltered reaction might undo years of carefully managed progress. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. People can move forward without moving past. They can rebuild without repairing. They can smile for the cameras while quietly carrying unresolved weight that shows itself at the worst possible time. That's what made this moment hit so hard. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was honest. And honesty doesn't always come wrapped in explanations. So now it's your turn. Do you believe some chapters should stay closed, no matter how they were written? Or do you think real healing only happens when everything is finally addressed, no matter how painful it gets? If you were in Rasheeda's place, would you have shut it down or spoken your truth right there on camera? And if you were in Kirk's position, would you have faced it head-on, or tried to steer the moment away before it spiraled? Drop your thoughts in the comments, not just reactions or reflections. If this story made you pause, if it made you rethink what moving on really looks like, make sure you like the video and subscribe. Because moments like this don't end when the episode does. They evolve, they resurface, and they reveal more over time than any confrontation ever could. Stay tuned, because some stories don't end with closure, they end with questions.